So today I'm going to talk chainsaws, and with my first time talking chainsaws, I figure I'd pull out a classic chainsaw from my collection with my 1960 Stihl Lightning. This saw also is known as a Stihl Contra. It was introduced by Stihl back in 1959, and it has a 106cc displacement motor on it. So this saw, when it was introduced, was one of the first saws to replace the two-man saws of the 40s and early 50s. And so this saw weighs about 26 pounds, but in relative to the two-man saws, this saw was actually a lightweight saw. So this saw makes about 6 horsepower to 9 horsepower, depending on like which source you read and what RPM it's at. The higher the RPM, they said actually the less horsepower that it started to make. But one of the interesting things about this saw is back when it was introduced back in 1959, it has what's known as a gearless design. So a lot of early single-man chainsaws had a gear drive underneath this cover, and the gear drive would add a lot of weight to the saw. So even though it was a single-man saw, it weighed a lot. Where this saw, being that it's a direct drive off the crankshaft to the clutch, which drives the chain, was able to save a lot of weight. Now, something else that's kind of cool about this saw is its ability to be used in any position. So you can use it upright like this, you could use it horizontally like this, you could use it on an angle. Now, a lot of people are probably out there thinking, well, that's a chainsaw. That's what chainsaws do. Back when this chainsaw was introduced, that was a new feature, and it was due to the fact that this has a diaphragm carburetor, which allows for it to run in any position. Before this, you would have a gravity-fed carburetor on the saw. The saw would stay in this position, and you would actually rotate the bar to cut at what you wanted. But the saw motor and everything stayed upright. And so this was a huge advancement, huge time saver, being that it was lightweight, had a lot of power, but you were able to use it in all positions. So there's a couple other things that are kind of interesting about this saw. So I'm going to head over to the workbench and kind of show you in a little bit better detail some of these cool features, and then we'll come back. Okay. So now I've got the saw up on the workbench. I've taken the bar and chain off of it, and I really hope that this camera is focused on the saw because, well, I'm kind of flying blind. But this is a saw that is almost 65 years old, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about the saw and some of the features that are different from today's and some of the things that I've seen that are kind of unique to it. So to start, I'm going to show the front here. And one of the things that I think is really cool is on the flywheel cover here, it's got the serial number. And so that tells me that this saw was built back in 1960, which would make it a 23-year-old, a 63-year-old saw. So, kind of moving over, the next cool thing is this muffler. The muffler is basically just a resonating chamber. If I took this off, you could see directly through down to here. And if I took off this thing that points it away from the bar and chain, you could see just directly through. There's nothing in there. It's more, the sound just kind of bounces around inside here and comes out a little bit quieter. So, spinning the saw around a little bit more, I've got my clutch cover on the side here, and so I'm going to pop this off. I need to clean this. It still doesn't like to come off. But just your standard clutch cover. It does have a hole here. I have seen a couple other saws looking online that have this hole. I don't know if this was a factory thing or if they just break in this spot. But looking underneath here, you can see that it has an external clutch on the saw. And so what that means is that on newer saws, a lot of Stihls have an internal clutch where the clutch mechanism is inside the chainsaw itself. This one has an external one. What that allows for is it helps keep the heat down. The saw has less likely to tendency to overheat. And then if you're able to see right down in here, the chain on this saw actually rides on on teeth that are on the clutch drum itself. On some of the newer saws, there's actually a sprocket. There's a sprocket that goes and floats on it. This one, the sprocket's integrated with the clutch drum. And one thing that I forgot to mention is to tension the chain on this saw, you actually have the tensioner right here. So this is a front-mounted tensioner. It makes stuff a little bit difficult, but once you get used to it, because a lot of old saws are built that way, it's not that bad. So I'm going to pop this clutch cover back on. And come back here. So reading online, this saw should have a manual oiler. So what that is every time that you want to push oil into the saw or onto the bar, you actually have to pump it manually. For the life of me, on this particular saw, I'm not finding it. So my best guess is that somebody took a newer style 070 or 090 with the automatic oiler and swapped that part of the saw onto this one at some point during its life. Potentially if the oiler went bad, they just went and they had that part lying around, put that on. Again, I don't know for sure, but that's my guess, because if I take the cap off and look inside, you can kind of see what looks like an oiler. But it's hard to see, so I'm not going to take the cap off and do that. So then coming around to the back of the saw here, you've got your on-off switch here. This gives the coil power, or allows power to flow through the coil and allow the saw to run. This is how you kill the saw. Other than that, just a big giant handle here for holding on to. And then we're back around to the front. One really cool thing is this gas cap has a German word on it, but it also has the Stihl Saw and Law logo. Honestly, I think it's a really cool logo. I wish Stihl still used it, but I thought it was kind of interesting that the gas cap had that on it. So I'm going to pop this top cover off here. And I know there's a lot of people online that like to say, you know, I love the old saws because they're all just metal and all that stuff. Well, this saw actually has a plastic top cover. And again, you can see the Saw and Law logo for Stihl. Stihl used this logo up until 1976 or 1977 when they switched over to the current design. And then on this particular saw, it says that it's a Lightning. This saw would also be marketed as a Contra over in Europe, but the Lightning was the United States designation for the saw. And so then just kind of looking underneath the cover, one thing that's kind of unique to this saw that I haven't seen on others is it has this heat shield over the cylinder to help keep the cover from melting, but not something that I've seen on any other saw. And then the air filter. So the air filter is just underneath this little part right here. This, I don't even know what it's called, housing. And so with the air filter, all I got to do is I pop these two tabs off, and I can pull the air filter out, and the air filter is just a screen encased in mesh. So old school, but you know, it works. Those clamp on nice and tight. So flipping the saw around one more time, here we have what's known as a diaphragm carburetor. This carburetor allowed the saw to run in any position. Up until then, you had like a gravity-fed carburetor on the two-man saws, and so to move the two-man saw, you would manually tilt the bar to make your cut. With this saw, you can use it in any way that you want. And so that was back in 1959 when this saw was introduced. Revolutionary is the term. So that's about it for underneath, for the bench top portion on this saw. I'm gonna head back to the other workbench to close out the video. So now that I've kind of shown you some of the features on the workbench that this saw has, I'm going to be ending this video, but I hope to be doing more of these kind of talking chainsaws, giving a little bit of an overview about the saws, talking a little bit about them. I have collected quite a few, or not quite a few, a couple chainsaws, and so I've got some that are kind of unique, and so hopefully you guys enjoy this and want to see more, and hopefully I'm able to do a couple more of these talks with you. So until next time, have a good one.